Attila, frequently referred to as Attila the Hun, was the ruler of the Huns from 434 until his death in March 453. Attila was a leader of the Hunnic Empire, a tribal confederation consisting of Huns, Ostrogoths, and Alans among others, on the territory of Central and Eastern Europe. During his reign, he was one of the most feared enemies of the Western and Eastern Roman empires. He crossed the Danube twice and plundered the Balkans, but was unable to take Constantinople. His unsuccessful campaign in Persia was followed in 441 by an invasion of the Eastern Roman Empire, the success of which emboldened Attila to invade the West. He also attempted to conquer Roman Gaul, crossing the Rhine in 451 and marching as far as Aurelianum before being defeated at the Battle of the Catalonian Plains. He subsequently invaded Italy, devastating the northern provinces, but was unable to take Rome. He planned for further campaigns against the Romans but died in 453. After Attila's death, his close advisor Ardavich of the Gepids led a Germanic revolt against Hunnic rule, after which the Hunnic Empire quickly collapsed. Appearance and character. There is no surviving first-hand account of Attila's appearance, but there is a possible second-hand source provided by Jordanus, who cites a description given by Priscus. He was a man born into the world to shake the nations, the scourge of all lands, who in some way terrified all mankind by the dreadful rumors noised abroad concerning him. He was haughty in his walk, rolling his eyes hither and thither, so that the power of his proud spirit appeared in the movement of his body. He was indeed a lover of war, yet restrained in action, mighty in council, gracious to suppliants and lenient to those who were once received into his protection. Short of stature, with a broad chest and a large head, his eyes were small, his beard thin and sprinkled with grey, and he had a flat nose and tanned skin, showing evidence of his origin. Some modern scholars have suggested that this description is typically East Asian, because it has all the combined features that fit the physical type of people from Eastern Asia, and Attila's ancestors may have come from there. Etymology. The origin of the name of Attila is unclear, and there's no consensus among scholars. Otto J. Manchenhelfen considered an East Germanic origin. Attila is formed from Gothic or Gepidic noun atta, father, by means of the diminutive suffix ila, meaning little father. The Gothic etymology can be tracked up to Jacob Grimm and Wilhelm Grimm in the early 19th century. Manchenhelfen noted that Hunnic names were not the true names of the Hun princes and lords. What we have are Hunnic names in Germanic dress, modified to fit the Gothic tongue, or popular Gothic etymologies, or both. Peter Heather, who strongly considered Germanic etymology of the name Attila and some of noble Huns, stated that the possibility Attila was of Germanic ancestry cannot be ruled out. The names of Attila's brother Bleda, and most powerful minister one Gesius, also have hypothetical Germanic etymology. Only credible Germanic etymology have Attila's blood relative Lordoricus, and certain Hungoth Ragnaris. Hyun Jin Kim argued that the Germanization of Hunnic names may have been a conscious policy among the Hunnic elite in the West in order to ease the transition to their rule of formerly independent German tribal unions. In the western part of Hunnic Empire, where mostly lived subjected Gothic tribes, Huns probably spoke both Hunnic and Gothic language, and as such bore Germanized or Germanic name, like Lordoricus. Manchenhelfen also expressed concern over orthography of the writer, possible morphological change, that some names writers heard from the Goths, the tendency of Roman and Byzantine writers to alter foreign names, and manuscript corruption. However, Kim noted that those names considered by Heather to be Gothic, especially in this case of Attila and Bleda, have more natural and probable Turkic etymology. Heather also ignored the fact that all Hunnic rulers before Attila, as well his father Munduk, paternal uncles Octa, Rugger and Ebasius, wife Krika, father-in-law Eskam, and sons Elak, Demgizich and Enak, have names of Turkic origin. Omelian Pritzik considered Alpha Tau Tau Iota Lambda Alpha a composite title name which derived from Turkic *s and *til, and the suffix a. The stressed backsyllabic til assimilated the front member s, so it became *as. It is a nominative, in form of Attil with the meaning, the oceanic, universal ruler. Peter Golden, citing Pritzik, like Laszlo Rassani, connected Attila's name with Menander, note in which used term Attilan as the name of the Volga River. J.J. Mykola connected it with Turkic. Gerdaldov considered it was related to Turkish Atli, or Turkish Itandil. Tom Shippey in his work Goths and Huns, The Rediscovery of Northern Cultures in the 19th Century, argued that the Gothic etymology is a product of 19th-century Germanic Romantic philological revisionism. M. Steedle casts doubt on the Germanic origin of the name Attila in a recently published article. The Gothic origin of the name Attila is questionable, Steedle writes. It is at least as likely to be of Hunnic origin. The article also indicates that Attila's name could have originated from Turkic Mongolian at Adyy Agta and Turkish Atli, meaning possessor of geldings, provider of war horses, a suitable name for a warlord. He concludes, "Of course we do not know how the name sounded in the language of the Huns. Sometime, somewhere, somehow a proto-form like *Agtala changed to *Attila. We cannot tell if the assimilation of GT to TT, or if loss of a final consonant took place in Hunnic, or if these changes were part of the adaptation process into Latin, Gothic and Greek. Truly, our knowledge of the Hunnic language is almost zero. One can only guess a solution to this riddle of Attila's name. The name has many variants in several languages. Atli and Atle in Old Norse, Etzel in Middle High German, Attila, Attila, and Ettel in Hungarian, Attila, Attila, Attile, or Attila in Turkish, and Adil and Edel in Kazakh or Adil or Edel in Mongolian. Historiography and Source. The historiography of Attila is faced with a major challenge, in that the only complete sources are written in Greek and Latin by the enemies of the Huns. Attila's contemporaries left many testimonials of his life, but only fragments of these remain. Priscus was a Roman diplomat and historian who wrote in Greek, and he was both a witness to and an actor in the story of Attila. As a member of the embassy of Theodosius II at the Hunnic court in 449, he was obviously biased by his political position, but his writing is a major source for information on the life of Attila, and he is the only person known to have recorded a physical description of him. He wrote a history of the late Roman Empire in 8 books covering the period from 430 to 476. Today we have only fragments of Priscus' work, but it was cited extensively by 6th-century historians Procopius and Jordanus, especially in Jordan's The Origin and Deeds of the Goths. It contains numerous references to Priscus's history, and it is also an important source of information about the Hunnic Empire and its neighbors. He describes the legacy of Attila and the Hunnic people for a century after Attila's death. Marcellinus Comes, a chancellor of Justinian during the same era, also describes the relations between the Huns and the Eastern Roman Empire. Numerous ecclesiastical writings contain useful but scattered information, sometimes difficult to authenticate or distorted by years of hand-copying between the 6th and 17th centuries. The Hungarian writers of the 12th century wished to portray the Huns in a positive light as their glorious ancestors, and so repressed certain historical elements and added their own legends. The literature and knowledge of the Huns themselves was transmitted orally, by means of epics and chanted poems that were handed down from generation to generation. Indirectly, fragments of this oral history have reached us via the literature of the Scandinavians and Germans, neighbors of the Huns who wrote between the 9th and 13th centuries. Attila is a major character in many medieval epics, such as the Nibelungenlied, as well as various Eddas and sagas. Archaeological investigation has uncovered some details about the lifestyle, art, and warfare of the Huns. There are a few traces of battles and sieges, but today the tomb of Attila and the location of his capital have not yet been found. Early life and background. The Huns were a group of Eurasian nomads, appearing from east of the Volga, who migrated into Europe c. 370 and built up an enormous empire there. Their main military techniques were mounted archery and javelin throwing. They were possibly the descendants of the Xiongnu, who had been northern neighbors of China 300 years before, and maybe the first expansion of Turkic people across Eurasia. They were in the process of developing settlements before their arrival in Europe. Yet the Huns were a society of pastoral warriors whose primary form of nourishment was meat and milk products of their herds. The origin and language of the Huns has been the subject of debate for centuries. According to some theories, their leaders at least may have spoken a Turkic language, perhaps closest to the modern Chavusha language. One scholar suggests a relationship to Yeniseian. According to the Encyclopedia of European Peoples, the Huns, especially those who migrated to the west, may have been a combination of Central Asian Turkic, Mongolic, and Ugric stocks. Attila's father Munzuk was the brother of kings Okta and Ruga, who reigned jointly over the Hunnic Empire in the early 5th century. This form of diarchy was recurrent with the Huns, but historians are unsure whether it was institutionalized, merely customary, or an occasional occurrence. His family was from a noble lineage, but it is uncertain whether they constituted a royal dynasty. Attila's birth date is not known, but journalist Eric de Schott and writer Hermann Schreiber have proposed a date of 395. However, historian Jaroslav Lebedinsky and archaeologist Katalin Escher prefer an estimate between the 390s and the first decade of the 5th century. Attila grew up in a rapidly changing world. His people were nomads who had only recently arrived in Europe. They crossed the Volga River during the 370s and annexed the territory of the Alans, then attacked the Gothic kingdom between the Carpathian Mountains and the Danube. They were a very mobile people, whose mounted archers had acquired a reputation of invincibility, and the Germanic tribes seemed unable to withstand them. Vast populations fleeing the Huns moved from Germania into the Roman Empire in the west and south, and along the banks of the Rhine and Danube. In 376, the Goths crossed the Danube, initially submitting to the Romans but soon rebelling against Emperor Valens, whom they killed in the Battle of Adrianople in 378. Large numbers of Vandals, Alans, Suebi, and Burgundians crossed the Rhine and invaded Roman Gaul on December 31, 406, to escape the Huns. The Roman Empire had been split in half since 395 and was ruled by two distinct governments, one based in Ravenna in the west, and the other in Constantinople in the east. The Roman emperors, both east and west, were generally from the Theodosian family in Attila's lifetime. The Huns dominated a vast territory with nebulous borders determined by the will of a constellation of ethnically varied peoples. Some were assimilated to Hunnic nationality, whereas many retained their own identities and rulers but acknowledged the suzerainty of the king of the Huns. The Huns were also the indirect source of many of the Romans' problems, driving various Germanic tribes into Roman territory. Yet relations between the two empires were cordial. The Romans used the Huns as mercenaries against the Germans and even in their civil wars. Thus, the usurper Joannes was able to recruit thousands of Huns for his army against Valentinian III in 424. It was Aetius, later patrician of the West, who managed this operation. They exchanged ambassadors and hostages, the alliance lasting from 401 to 450 and permitting the Romans numerous military victories. The Huns considered the Romans to be paying them tribute, whereas the Romans preferred to view this as payment for services rendered. The Huns had become a great power by the time that Attila came of age during the reign of his uncle Rugger, to the point that Nestorius, the Patriarch of Constantinople, deplored the situation with these words: "They have become both masters and slaves of the Romans." Campaigns against the Eastern Roman Empire. The death of Rugger in 434 left the sons of his brother Munzuk, Attila and Bleda, in control of the united Hun tribes. At the time of the two brothers' accession, the Hun tribes were bargaining with Eastern Roman Emperor Theodosius II's envoys for the return of several renegades who had taken refuge within the Eastern Roman Empire, possibly Hunnic nobles who disagreed with the brothers' assumption of leadership. The following year, Attila and Bleda met with the imperial legation at Margus, all seated on horseback in the Hunnic manner, and negotiated a successful treaty. The Romans agreed to return the fugitives, to double their previous tribute of 350 Roman pounds of gold, to open their markets to Hunnish traders, and to pay a ransom of 8 solidi for each Roman taken prisoner by the Huns. The Huns, satisfied with the treaty, decamped from the Roman Empire and returned to their home in the Great Hungarian Plain, perhaps to consolidate and strengthen their empire. Theodosius used this opportunity to strengthen the walls of Constantinople, building the city's first sea wall, and to build up his border defences along the Danube. The Huns remained out of Roman sight for the next few years while they invaded the Sassanid Empire. They were defeated in Armenia by the Sassanids, abandoned their invasion, and turned their attentions back to Europe. In 440, they reappeared in force on the borders of the Roman Empire, attacking the merchants at the market on the north bank of the Danube that had been established by the treaty. Crossing the Danube, they laid waste to the cities of Illyricum and forts on the river, including Viminatium, a city of Moesia. Their advance began at Margus, where they demanded that the Romans turn over a bishop who had retained property that Attila regarded as his. While the Romans discussed the bishop's fate, he slipped away secretly to the Huns and betrayed the city to them. While the Huns attacked city-states along the Danube, the Vandals captured the western Roman province of Africa and its capital of Carthage. Carthage was the richest province of the Western Empire and a main source of food for Rome. The Sassanid Shah Yazdijid II invaded Armenia in 441. The Romans stripped the Balkan area of forces, sending them to Sicily in order to mount an expedition against the Vandals in Africa. This left Attila and Bleda a clear path through Illyricum into the Balkans, which they invaded in 441. The Hunnish army sacked Margus and Viminatium, and then took Singidunum and Sirmium. During 442, Theodosius recalled his troops from Sicily and ordered a large issue of new coins to finance operations against the Huns. He believed that he could defeat the Huns and refused the Hunnish king's demands. Attila responded with a campaign in 443. The Huns were equipped with new military weapons as they advanced along the Danube, such as battering rams and rolling siege towers, and they overran the military centers of Rhaetia and successfully besieged Naissus. Advancing along the Nisava River, the Huns next took Serdica, Philippopolis, and Arcadiopolis. They encountered and destroyed a Roman army outside Constantinople but were stopped by the double walls of the eastern capital. They defeated a second army near Callipolis. Theodosius, stripped of his armed forces, admitted defeat, sending the Magister Militium per Orient to Manetolius to negotiate peace terms. The terms were harsher than the previous treaty. The emperor agreed to hand over 6,000 Roman pounds of gold as punishment for having disobeyed the terms of the treaty during the invasion. The yearly tribute was tripled, rising to 2,100 Roman pounds in gold, and the ransom for each Roman prisoner rose to 12 solidi. Their demands were met for a time, and the Hun kings withdrew into the interior of their empire. Bleda died following the Huns' withdrawal from Byzantium. Attila then took the throne for himself, becoming the sole ruler of the Huns. Solitary kingship. In 447, Attila again rode south into the Eastern Roman Empire through Moesia. The Roman army, under Gothic Magister Militium Arnegisclus, met him in the Battle of the Utus and was defeated, though not without inflicting heavy losses. The Huns were left unopposed and rampaged through the Balkans as far as Thermopylae. Constantinople itself was saved by the Isaurian troops of Magister Militium per Orientum Zeno and protected by the intervention of Prefect Constantinus, who organized the reconstruction of the walls that had been previously damaged by earthquakes and, in some places, to construct a new line of fortification in front of the old. An account of this invasion survives. The barbarian nation of the Huns, which was in Thrace, became so great that more than 100 cities were captured and Constantinople almost came into danger and most men fled from it. And there were so many murders and bloodlettings that the dead could not be numbered.